Ladies and gentlemen, this is Internet Personality Vangelus. Enter keyword HLJ. Lock off! This is a review of Revoltech Dancouga, a Yamaguchi robot in the Revoltech line. Where have I heard that phrase before? This definitely is not the soul of Chogokin, but it's still pretty cool, so let's take a look. The Yamaguchi pelvis is strong in this rendition of Dancouga. He is a Revoltech figure that is able to maintain both dynamic and fairly neutral poses thanks to his sculpt, provided you give a few liberties to his thrusting crotch. Sculpted details are solid. In particular, I like the treads on the back of his limbs. The paint is fairly monochrome and dark, but the brightly colored spots are clean and vibrantly applied. Being a Revoltech, he is, thankfully, loaded with Revoltech joints. His shoulders click hardcore. His elbows are actually really cool because the Revoltech joint's placed in a certain way that allows for a lot of good swiveling. His arms have a really weird cut joint here on the bicep. I think it's because of the size of his shoulder pads. Unfortunately, this makes posing him in the arms a little bit odd once you start trying to do double-handed sword poses and whatnot. It's a little bit strange. It reminds me of earlier Revoltechs when they used a lot more monoshaft stuff. It's not a bad thing, but it is something to be aware of. It's outside of the norm of what you might be expecting, just mostly because of the angle here. Also, this silver paint is gorgeous. I will say his head, it's posable, but the joint is kind of odd. He can look way up like this, and he can look way forward like this, almost like a really weird snake man. But the neutral pose back here, it seems a little bit hunched. And despite having two joints, it's kind of difficult to get him looking natural. So that's a bit odd. Thankfully, his torso joint does everything it needs to do. And down here on the legs, he's got Revoltech hips and a panel moving up on the skirt. Over here, his knee joints do collapse in on the treads when bent the right way, which I'm totally not doing right now. Ha! There we go. And his ankles are also Revoltech'd out. So, he's decently posable for a Revoltech. There's nothing remarkable here. Oh, by the way, I should mention, these yellow things can actually move up to get out of the way when you're moving his arms like this. So that's actually a really nice touch. But there is nothing super remarkable here. There's nothing that makes you go like, oh man, that's an advance in Revoltech technology. This dude is just a Revoltech Dancouga. And that's not a bad thing, but it also means that there's nothing that will make your eyes sparkle with delight. Unless a posable Dancouga at this size has been your lifelong dream. And it may well have been. Dancouga comes with the lovely Revoltech Orange Box O accessories, as well as a sword that doesn't fit inside. Popping this open, it's just a whole bunch of hands. A huge pile of hands. Oh, and one of those Revel tokens. But these hands are in tandem with his fists, able to give you a bunch of different posing options. Check it out! He can wave at you with one of the splayed open hands. There's also a singular left hand, which has a pose that I'm not sure exactly if it signifies something, but he's totally gonna pinch your cheek. This looks like it could be a salute of some kind, or it could be to hold something. The salute seems the most likely to me, having not actually seen Dancouga, and I've heard mixed reviews on whether or not I even should. Something I should point out about the hands, though, is that they all have the built-in Figma-like wrist joint that I was kind of harping on in an earlier review. These ones are incredibly stiff and tight, and these feel way better than on whichever getter that was that had these before. So I gotta say, props to Revoltech, you actually are making this work, and I'm okay with this kind of technology on your toys now. He also has one other pair of hands, which are hands that are designed to hold something. What's the something they can hold? What do you think the something they can hold is? The one other accessory he comes with. Are you seriously asking me this question, ladies and gentlemen? Do you really need this much help? Let me tell you something. When you step on the gas in a car, the car goes forward. When you push the other pedal, the car stops. When you jump off a building, you go splat. And when you breathe in, there's air filling your lungs. How many more things do I have to tell you? Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm having a bout of male menopause. I find it's easiest to actually stick the sword in before you attach the hand, because it's a bit of a tight connection. It's pretty solid, though, and it doesn't feel like it's going to strip any yellow off of the sword, unless that's actually just the color of plastic this is cast in. But once you have that in place and you plug it into his hand, Dancouga can totally use the Sword of Dancouga, or whatever it is called. It should be called something like the Dancouken, and I really hope it is, because that would be the best. And now he can totally wave a sword around and cut some fools in half, all like blazing sword style. Oh yeah, I totally dropped a Voltron. I want to say, actually, thanks to the wrist joints that I was just talking about, in these hands, they're actually bending this way, and it allows for some really great, like, pointing the sword, having the sword hang down lower rather than pointing up like this, kind of poses. I really dig that. These are not the only gimmicks he has, though. He's got one other thing that he can do, which rounds out his package nicely and makes his price point feel like it's not a ripoff. Mounted on Dancouga's back is this awesome artillery cannon. It's articulated and can totally come up and point over his head. And then you can swivel these cannons around and totally nuke some fools. But that's not all! You might say to yourself, Dancouga, you silly fool with your gun hat. You think you could stop me? I'm a supervillain. Then Dancouga's all like, guess what? Big Moss, one of my components, the main one, he has these things that fold out of his spine and turn into his kidneys. Now my kidneys are missile launchers. These are the Big Moss cannons. And now you've got all this stuff out. This is totally some kind of artillery assault. And I really like it. This makes this Dancouga into a Revoltech I like. Without this stuff, he'd be a little bit too boring, to be honest. But this adds something that finishes him off. Now he's got a full set of accessories, the basics at least, and he's got his own personal gimmick, that being all these guns. Dancouga is a vaguely generic but very solid Revoltech robot. His joints and sculpt allow for a pleasant amount of posability, and the artillery gimmicks on his backpack are simple and effective. He does nothing wrong, but also does nothing astounding. Totally recommended for any Dancouga or Revoltech fan, and still somewhat recommended if you just enjoy cool robot toys and can find this guy for a good price. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus. I hope this review's been helpful to you, and I hope it might have educated you about yet another affordable and pretty neat Revoltech robot toy. That said, if you're a Dancouga fan, I do apologize for my lack of knowledge about your franchise. I can assure you that I highly respect any robot who is called both Dan and Couga. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, say it with me. Oyaji!